Desde aquí se ve. Bueno. Os voy a poner esto para acá, porque así, si habláis desde aquí, un poquito más el de esto, porque es que si no tapa toda la parte de abajo de la pantalla se tapa, ¿vale? Aquí os colocáis. Yo sí tengo micro aquí, imagino. Okay. Hello, good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Hello, everyone. You're very welcome to these sessions. We're almost making the first day. So thanks to everyone that could have chosen to go anywhere else, whether that is another session or visit Barcelona or not even come to Barcelona at all, and you're here. So thanks very much. We do really appreciate that. So in the next hour and 15 minutes, what we are going to do is that we are going to literally explore baby steps, a topic, it's okay, and a topic which is international aid for tertiary education. We're saying tertiary because we are including higher education, but also higher VED or TVED, short programs, 2-year program into tertiary education. So just for you to know what is the framework, we're using both, longer programs, shorter programs. So all the aid that is dedicated to that topic. The way this session is going to go is that we'll be first presenting a report about this topic that we are launching today with you. And then we'll have a panel with 4 fantastic panelists that are here, and I will introduce later properly. My name is Victoria Garamoros. I am the Chief of Research and Analysis at the UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean. Always in last year, we have a global mandate, so we're working globally now. And I guess without any further ado, I'd like to start talking a little bit about the report, because the people that are really going to present that with me come up here are my colleagues, Mauricio Escriben and Eglis Chacon, within the core team working on this topic. And I'd like to start by just giving the broad overview of why are we doing this, I guess. And the why is that because we started hearing some news here and there about some money flows, and I guess most of our would be international students, so we've also experienced ourselves to have scholarships from third countries. And when we started asking each other, how much do we know about this? It's like, really, not much. So when we went to see what was available, again, not much. This is obviously, the frame of this is international aid. Yes, international aid has been studied. There has been lots of conferences, wanted to have some standards, wanted to have some guidelines. Then when we get to reality, we see that there is no very strong conclusions about how much of this should be done, how it should be done. But then that is generally. Then if we get to tertiary education, we see that literature is very, very limited. And then when we get to data, we saw data exist. Yes, that is collected by the creditory reporting system that the OECD Development Development Center collects, but no one ever analyzed it. Then we understood why, right? So we went there and extract data, and then we bring that. So this, what we're bringing today here, it's a mix of the very few literature that we found, but also this data that it's available from 2002 to 2019. What do we want to do with this? I guess we want to do the first step. We want to put the first few stones in a pathway that we know is going to be long. We don't bring answers here just to get expectations clear. We have a lot of questions ourselves, we have some data, and we would like this to be the beginning of a discussion. But we do think that we're filling a critical gap in the literature is that we did not have any evidence about this topic, and we're bringing some evidence today, contextualizing this narrative, these discussions, and at the end we can only give very few high levels initial recommendations on this. But as I said, main motivation here is let's start talking about this, let's start putting evidence out there that allows us to talk about it, to have evidence-based conversations and therefore evidence-based decisions. The main results of these projects are going to be my colleagues presenting them right now.
Thank you, Victoria. So let me give you this one figure. 5.3 billion was the total amount of tertiary education aid that flew to multiple countries in 2019. So it was 5.3 billion given as aid in 2019. But what is the global scenario of tertiary education aid? What does this 5.3 billion mean? What has happened so far? What does the data tell us? Which ones are the main characteristics of this flow of monetary resources? As Victoria told you, our first step was going into the creditor reporting system and systematize, gather, analyze the whole data set that tracks disbursements of international aid since 2002. And I'm going to tell you about the big picture. I know the graphs are a bit small, but I will give you the key features. First of all, it's important to know that for social infrastructure services, that's the macro category of aid, a third of all this 5.3 billion went to this category. And why is it important? Because it's the umbrella of education. And within social infrastructure services, education represented 21%. And if we keep breaking the data down even further, we know that within education, tertiary education was the level that received most aid, with 37%. These are data from 2019, but historically the trend aligns, so it has been constant over time. And this 37% of tertiary education aid means in the macro scheme of things, 2.7% of all the aid dedicated to all the different sectors worldwide. So as you may expect, when we crunch the data into a heat map, it's clear that there is a very strong geographical divide between the global north and the global south, being north the main donors and global south the main recipients. This was expected even before going into the data, but so far the magnitude of this divide was unknown. And with the heat map, we can see which countries are the main donors, which countries are the main recipients, so we can put a picture into what we intuitively thought was going to be the end result. And here I'm showing you the historical evolution of the main donors since 2002. And as you can see, the total amount of aid has been increasing over time, but it's not just the amount, it's also the number of countries that are donating. But two countries stand out from the data, and those are Germany and France, and together they accounted for almost half of all the tertiary education aid that was given in 2019. Now, moving to the regional distribution of these resources, both graphs show how aid is being distributed. The first one on the left represents the flow of resources in monetary terms, and the second one as a regional share. And it's interesting to see that Asia and the Pacific is historically got between 35 and 40% of all the international aid flows to tertiary education, while other regions with lower human development indicators or lower economic prospects, like Africa, for instance, were losing support over time. So now I will give the floor to my colleague Eglis, who is going to finish telling you about the key findings of the report.
Thank you, Mari. So how this regional looks like within countries and who received the more aid. So here in 2002, we can see that Africa and Arab states received the most amount of aid, being Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia the biggest recipients in this year. But this picture had changed over time. Right now, the region who received the most is Asia and the Pacific, being China the most prominent recipient with 8% of total tertiary education aid. So, but if we go further with the data, we could also extract the information with the type of tertiary education aid. And we can see that more than 71% of tertiary education aid is mostly likely to stay in the donor country. And this goes through scholarships, training in donor country, and also imputed student costs, which refer the expenses of a student need to carry while they are studying in the donor country. So we also see in this graph that 21 or almost 22% is going to project type intervention. We pursue a specific objective with the aid. And these are agreed within the donors and the recipient countries. So now we want to see, we thought it was interesting to show this slide because in general terms, we see that we've been talking about tertiary education, as that's why the data allow us to classify within higher education and technical and managerial training. And we perhaps see that there is only 3% of tertiary education aid that is allocated to Tibet. And I think we want to leave this point here in the table, having in mind that Tibet is an important level of education to enhance the 2030 agenda and long-life learning. So why is it 3%? This is one of the questions that we have, and I think the panel perhaps could bring some ideas here. And this is one of the things that definitely we need to get more into research. And of course, when we were looking at the data, another classification that we could work with was the main channels through data or through money inflow is delivered to recipient countries. And we can also see that tertiary education aid is delivered mainly through government and public institutions and university colleges and research institutes. Despite this flow distribution, we don't know the main characteristics of what are the implications of the choosing this channel. So this is another question that we are leaving here, but it's also important to see further in terms of what is the efficiency of the aid. Which kind of channel we improve the efficiency of this aid. So bear in mind these numbers because I think they are important while talking about tertiary education distribution and channeling. And finally, in terms of the data, we want also to bring here that we have also shown you the main trends related in the aggregate terms of the data. But what we have seen until now is also it is important to note that individual disbursement in 2019 has been very increasing. So what we can see in this slide is that most 94% of the tertiary education ODA was widely spread in several micro-size disbursement. So this is another question that the report brings, and I think it's important to further research about the main considerations about how the money is given, but also how it is being disbursed.
Thanks very much, Elise. Mauricio, we're giving you a lot of data here. We're testing if you're awake, like, you know, siesta time in Spain. So after all this, we put all this data out there for which, again, we don't have the whys. But we think that we have enough to be able to say a few things, a few high-level recommendations. The first one is the easy one. There was no data. Let's start having a data-driven approach. Let's start having evidence-based conversations to this topic. We don't really know how tertiary education aid works. I mean, can we assume that it works in the same way that secondary and primary? Maybe yes, maybe no. What are the special characteristics that allows us to think or to say it's better to do one thing than something else? What we've been able to see looking at the micro data is that, let's start again. If there's something we know is that education takes time. So if we're going to do a project or we're going to support a higher education system in any way, we have to think long term. So to be much more systematic on this, and obviously to have also recipient focused solutions. This is not the same for every country, even when you are only one agency. For this, at the end of the day, what do we want? We want to coordinate with recipients as much as possible, and coordinate not in a donor-recipient way, but in a partnership way, in an equal partnership dialogue that looks at the long term and think what can be the best from the recipient's perspective. It got our attention that within higher education aid, only 3% went to TVEC, when, as my colleague said, it can be an important sector for developing countries. So is that an opportunity that we're not using? Maybe, maybe not, but it would be good to at least explore. There is something that we haven't been bringing here too much because we have to select some findings, but we've seen that for some countries, the amount of higher education aid that they receive, it was quite large. So that also makes it think that if they receive too much money from another source, but suddenly that is finished from one day to another, that could potentially create, some dependency and some problems if the aid is not there, if a country relies too much in aid. And when we are talking about this fragmentation and all these countries that each of them want to do their best, because they do want, but sometimes they're using maybe too micro disbursements. Are we getting there in this way? Is this the best way? Can we maybe explore, as other agencies, for example, the United Nations do, a fund, something that makes us to think collectively and to have the partnership with the recipients and to also think in the long term and being able to manage larger amount of money to do more strategic projects? Maybe, we don't know, but we think it's worth talking about it and it's worth exploring. This is as far as we can go. So we would like to tell you that this report is available in our website from right now, that you're welcome to read it, to download it. And as we say, our aim is to start something. It is not we don't have the final answers. And we really would like, because we need that to be with all of you, with donor countries, with the recipient countries, with all the international organizations, because I guess only all of us will be able to get further with this topic. And without no more delay, I'd like to welcome the panel, our panelists. So I'll ask all of you, the four of you, to come here. I'm going to sit here with you, and I'm going to be introducing each of you properly. Maybe before I start reading just some highlights of your very impressive bios, I want to say that at the very beginning we wanted to bring here a panel that was representative from donor countries, recipient countries. That was our initial intention. We had contacts with several recipient countries. It was difficult to know who was the person that was receiving that money at the other end. Then we also, we've tried, I want to say that we've made an effort to have recipients countries represented here. It could not happen at the end, but this is the first, as I say, of many conversations that we're going to have about this topic. So this is not even this panel is going to be an end to this topic. So with that, I want to welcome our four speakers today, and maybe start with you, Hilda, just right here. We have Hilda Helen Cramer. She's the head of department at the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. And prior to joining the ministry, she was the general manager of the Center for Care Research, Western Norway, where she was project management, financial management, and HR for the center's projects and employees. Also, administrative head of the project Technology, Health and Care Services. She's also had different positions within the government, also in New York as well. Hilda holds a Master of Arts in International Affairs from the American University. Welcome, Hilda. With us as well, and in this order, we have Dr. Joanna Newman. Joanna, welcome. She's the Chief Executive and Secretary General of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Prior to joining ACU in 2017, Dr. Newman was Vice Principal International at King's College London. Her previous positions include Director of the UK Higher Education International Unit, today known as Universities UK International, and Head of Higher Education at the British Library. She is a Senior Research Fellow in the Department of History of King's College London, Honorary Research Fellow at the University of Southampton, among other positions. And we are introducing now to Dr. Michael Harms. He is Deputy Secretary General of the German Academic Exchange Services, more well known as DAD or DAD. Dr. Harms has been within the DAD since 2001, where he has held various management positions, including Director of Communications, the Head of Cairo Regional Office, and the Director of German Science Center, the Head of the North Africa, Middle and Near East Group, among others. He also doctorate in language teaching research at Ruhr University, Bochum. And last but not least, we have with us Mark Vleck de Koning. He is the Partnership and Program Team Leader at NAFIC, which is the Dutch Organization for Internationalization in Education. And prior to being a team leader in this organization, he was a research consultant at NAFIC's Knowledge and Innovation Department and focused on projects that brought data-driven approaches in favor of the internationalization of Dutch higher education institutions. He holds a Master in Political Sciences from Radboud University. So now I wanted to again welcome the four of you. As I guess as you could see, we brought data, we brought evidence without necessarily bringing a lot of the why something happened. This is something that we can do alone, and this is the first step into trying to find out why things are happening. And what do you think? What's your opinion? You are a piece of that puzzle. Puzzle is much bigger, but you all are a piece of that puzzle. So now we want to hear from you. We want to maybe get a bit closer to knowing why some of those things you think happen. What are you doing that is aligned with that? Maybe what are you doing that you haven't seen represented in this global figure? We'd love to hear that. I'm going to be asking questions, and it's really going to be up to you to just jump in and just give us the answers that you think fit. So we are starting, if you remember, we were talking about different regions that receive different amount of money and how this changed in time. Something that got our attention was, if we started looking in 2002, we have Africa as the main region as recipient countries. And now, Africa has been losing support in terms of funding for tertiary education, and Asia has been gaining that, being the main recipient region these days. I'd like to hear a bit from you. Is this something that resonates with you? Is this something that you also feel, do you have any whys? So just opening the floor to any of you that want to break the ice.
I'll have a go.
Please.
But I'm the person on the panel who doesn't represent a funding body. I'm the person on the panel who represents over 500 universities in 53 countries, where 66% of our members live in low or middle income countries. So in a way, you do have a representation here of those countries and recipients of aid. I just wanted to start actually by saying how welcome this report is. It's because the Association of Commonwealth Universities has pinned its identity on how important higher education is to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and how if you're funding education and you are creating sustainable, prosperous communities, stable communities, you need higher education in the picture. So one of the first big surprises for me was that more is spent on tertiary than basic or secondary education, and that's a really interesting area to look at and to try to understand more. And I think part of the answer to that is the question you asked me, which is, why has more aid gone to Asia than to Africa, or has it changed in balance? And it's potentially because of the aid that this report shows, it shows 70% are in scholarships. So it's showing a very small percentage in capacity building in institutions. I would suggest potentially that where you have gross tertiary enrolment as much higher in many Asian countries, like Korea has 98% or something, China, I don't know what the statistic is, but it's high, it's easier to provide the kind of aid, if you like, inverted commas, to those countries where the recipients are scholars going to other countries and creating kind of mobility programs, than it is to work in low and middle income countries, building the capacity of institutions to receive scholars or to build the capacity of those institutions. And so I think there should be a rebalance. I think it's showing it, because if you think about demographics, the largest youth populations are across sub-Saharan African countries, and that if we want to have the prosperous, stable communities that I've just talked about, you need to also empower communities in those countries to have access to good primary, good secondary, and good tertiary education. And finally, I would say that to have good primary and secondary education, you need the contribution of higher education. It makes good pedagogy, it trains teachers, it creates content, it gives children aspirations to go on and have careers that might need tertiary education. And that can't all be through the mechanism of mobility, because that's always a small, I think the report shows something like 3%. It cannot be the only way. And we might come on later to there's lots of very innovative ways now to build capacity and have scholarships involved. And just finally, the ACU's been running scholarships since '53. We have probably over 57,000 alumni, and so we're very keen to fit in with DARD and with NUFIC and with all the funding agencies to use our alumni data to be able to track the impact that it makes in the relationship between gross tertiary enrolment and GDP.
Thanks very much, Joanna. Any other insights to this or reaction to what Joanna has said?
Yeah, maybe I can follow up on that. First of all, thank you for the report. I once heard this quotation of without data, you're just another guy with an opinion. And I think, to make informed decisions, you need data, and, so this is very, very welcome. Maybe I can say one or two sentences about my organization, because we are a funding body. We are the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service. And I think what may be important to know about us, is certainly very important to us, is that we are non-governmental. We are a member organization of the German universities. However, most or even all of our funds come from German ministries, so we act as an intermediary body for them. And basically we enable our member universities to internationalize, to work together with their counterparts on the entire globe, actually. So what is our mission and mandate is obviously, with regards to development cooperation, is to expand access, improve quality, and increase relevance, in and for universities in the global south. If I can say something about the findings with regards to Africa and Asia, because we did get a glimpse of the results beforehand, I have to reveal here. And we checked on our data, and certainly for the DAAD, this is not quite the same. Mm-hmm. So it actually holds true that the both institutional cooperation and scholarship funding for Africa was far more than it was for Asia. So it does not correspond with your figures. But mm-hmm. We're actually on the 40% side of the university cooperation. So mm-hmm. that may explain it. So roughly we're talking about 36 or even 57% with regards to the funding ministries in favor of Africa rather than Asia. I have to say some bits about the balance of scholarships and institutional funding, but maybe I'll get to that later.
We'll get to that. It's a lot of data. Let's try to get one at a time. Mark, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd like to echo the comments of the colleagues. Congratulations on the brilliant report. It was very insightful and valuable to read. So I really commend UNESCO for taking the effort and going through all those motions to compile this incredible amount of data. As for NAFIC, we are the Dutch Organization for Internationalization of Education. We're actually celebrating our 70th birthday this year, and that's 70 years of capacity building and scholarships that we have been doing. And I think over time that we have seen that the flow of work that we're doing really differs between the different regions and different countries of the world. So I think that this is perhaps the current status quo, but it might also be shifting again in the future and has shifted historically. And I think that also points to how treacherous it almost is to use categories as wide as a continent. Because if we're considering Asia, you would have Turkey, Afghanistan, China, Asia Pacific would even include Australia, and the comparability between these countries is so incredibly low. So I would be very hard pressed to say, well, we should be shifting from Asia to Africa, but rather I think it speaks to the importance of disaggregating the data further and figuring out what is happening on the country level and preferably even on the regions within different countries. Because ultimately what we're working towards is human development, human dignity. And I think regardless of whether you're in Asia or in Africa or anywhere else in the world, there's people that are deserving of our support. And I was in South Africa only a few weeks ago. And South Africa is certainly by African standards a country that is quite well developed, but is also suffering of gross inequalities. So the work we do in South Africa matters greatly, not because it's South Africa, but because we're working towards those communities that need it most. And I think that's a very important note to make here.
Indeed. No, thanks very much, Mark. Just very quickly only add in that we did that second step, going to country levels, and if you check globally, China is an 8%, second country is India, but then you get to, we got to see how much per student, which at the end of the day, taking the population of each of the countries, they are not the countries that receive the most per student. So we're talking about global figure. That's what we say. We're only going to go a little bit into the right direction. There are still many more conversations that will need to happen. Hilda, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. I think much has been said already, and I also would congratulate you on a very interesting and good report. And I think what has been said, that I think also the picture is a little bit more complex and diversified than perhaps it looks at first sight. In the Norwegian context, I come from the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills, but also the Norwegian Agency for Development Aid, Development Cooperation fund programs in higher education. So we are several agencies in this field. And also in the Norwegian case, Africa is the region that receives the most funds, and it's also in line with the policies for development aid in Norway, with the majority of the prioritized countries are in Africa. But I do agree that maybe part of the explanation, as you were saying, has to do with the scholarships, and that makes it more available to students from Asian countries. So I think those things are connected, definitely. And last, we will probably get to it, but also Norway does no longer have a dedicated scholarship programs anymore. We put our money into partnership programs, so it's a sort of wanted policy in Norway that we make that shift that you're talking about already. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. No, definitely there is no one approach that we could see when we looked at how different countries are doing. That's why I believe that also between you, sharing practices and good practices and maybe not so good practices is also very useful for all of you going forward in that respect. Let me, Hilda, congratulate you, because also Hilda coordinates the donor harmonization group. That it's an informal group, but it's a very useful group. I had the opportunity to just go to one of their meetings at the end of last year in which we start talking about this topic, and in which different agencies just meet to share good practices and to see how can they better coordinate to then eventually that leads to an harmonization of these topics. So great efforts there as well, Hilda. And maybe building into a couple of you has mentioned scholarships. So that then let's touch on that, and let's maybe cover that a little bit more. As we did show before about the largest type of aid is scholarships. But scholarships to study in the donor country, it's sort of coupled with another type of aid, which is the cost that they pay to their local universities, for example, to like the fees and all the costs to take those students. So we put those two things together, we are over 70% of the total aid. And that was also a very interesting result for us, something that we would like to talk to you about. I guess even the three of us have benefited from those types of scholarships ourselves. We've all gone to all the countries to study. I think most of us have come back to our home countries then later. We would love to hear from you. I mean, what are scholarships for you? What are the main advantages? Is that important a strategy within your agencies? In your case, Joanna, do you see that often within also your association? Anyone?
Well, should I?
If
Please,
you don't
Mark.
go for, yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I think, firstly, for scholarships, they are highly effective. Scholarships are highly effective instruments to support and help individuals with their livelihoods, with their personal development, with their bildung. And we've done tracer studies of the scholarship programs that we've done, and they all report that they would have more job opportunities, that they would have opportunities to move up in positions in their respective companies. So I think that scholarships are a crucial instrument in disbursing tertiary education aid, and even if it's a large portion of it, I think there is some of that is definitely justified. Another reason I think why they might be so prevalent is that they are rather cost efficient to implement. Given that there's a lot of infrastructures already in the countries that we come from, I mean, the courses and the masters, they are often already given, and you're allowing students to benefit from the knowledge and the learning that is already present in the country and the university you're doing, so you're not setting up completely new structures. However, I do also agree that just scholarships is not enough. You have to build towards structural capacity within countries. I think studies have shown that once countries are insufficiently capable of providing education for their student force, or insufficient of providing sufficient quality education, that those students start to look outwards. And from that perspective, a scholarship is a band-aid. You can help students that are looking for higher education and are not able to find it at home. But ultimately, the difference will be made when the education system at home is able to take care of those students itself. And that's what you need to work toward as well.
Thank you.
So maybe I can,
Please.
if I may, just follow up on that, because my friend Mark mentioned the 70 years that you've been going very strongly. And we're almost approaching 100 years, because the DAD was funded in 1925, and it was actually a student initiative. It was a German student who had the opportunity to go to the States, and he must have had the time of his life, came back and said, wow, that's such a wonderful experience. I want to share that, and I want to help setting up an organization or a body that does exactly that. He had no idea what would have become of his initiative, but there we go. So you are not surprised probably that I would go along with what Mark said, and I think it's extremely important to invest in brains, in personalities, and in change agents, because after all, structures are extremely important. But if we don't have the people, if we don't have, the ideas of people who really want to change something, then everything's gonna stay like it is. And there's also a lot to say for the labor market in the countries in the global south, because it can be really a stimulus if people come back from Europe and share their experience, maybe even establish companies or work as local representatives of European companies in their countries. So there's a lot of benefits in that way. However, as an organization, we have been including institutional cooperation for many, many years now. And in fact, this section of our business, as it were, is actually growing. So I think what we need is a good balance, and it's not just scholarships or institutional cooperation. It's also a mixture. It's also a clever way of helping structures being built in our partner countries. Let me just give you one example. This works with scholarships. We have in-country or in-region scholarships, which really make it possible for, say, students in Yemen to study medicine in Cairo.
Okay.
And this is both good for Yemen. It's also good for Cairo because it really helps, maintaining and developing the structures there.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting. We've been researching about this for a while, and we haven't come across those regional scholarships, which I personally find quite interesting. Thanks very much.
So I
Joanna?
would say that I agree with everything you've said about scholarships and the way that they transform an individual's life and give them chances that they haven't had before. But they also not only spend money in the host country, donor country, but the majority of the alumni that we've tracked go back to the countries that they come from. In fact, it's a condition of many of the scholarships that they do so. And so you're building infrastructure and development and capacity by doing that. But it's also, I think it is an imperfect mechanism. It's a proven mechanism, it's a cost-effective mechanism, it's a very, very good way of demonstrating to donor countries how aid is spent wisely and well. So when the public want to know how money is spent, you can demonstrate with scholarships very well. But this is where I have a question in some ways, which is where is aid and where is ODA spent? So many governments will use ODA spend in order to pursue, for example, soft power relationships, which is why also you might have a tilt towards some of the middle-income countries rather than the lower-income countries, because the scholars who have been on the scholarships are going to form relationships with the country that they have gone to study with. And that is rather different, I think, than the idea of growing tertiary education to grow capacity in countries and to grow GDP in those countries and stability. And so I think one of the interesting areas to look at is how higher education has now become a funder and is being funded. So many of our universities are now able to work in capacity building projects because aid funding is now being directed to them as well. I think that's quite a new development. It certainly is in the UK, and that has meant that we have done more capacity building projects, for example, working with 20 universities in East Africa to create really good quality content, co-create it and then share it, so addressing the issue of capacity in country. And that's only happened in the last few years because there's been a shift in policies. We also run South-South and North-South scholarships. So we have, under the Commonwealth Government's programme, a pretty unique programme to fully fund master's programmes. So again, from South Africa to Kenya or from Kenya to Malawi, you can study a 2-year master's, and that's something that we want to promote. But we're also promoting split-site PhDs and distance masters. Split-site PhDs are a fantastic way of introducing universities to each other across borders, where not only do the students benefit, but the universities get to know each other. And MasterCard is also exploring, for example, much more investment in higher education hubs and pilot places where they want double degrees, where the students will benefit and not necessarily have to travel to get their degree, but will benefit from a university in, say, the Global North and the Global South. So I think I'm in favour of scholarships as a modality, and we run big scholarship schemes, but it's not the only one. And I really welcome the move in some ways from development agencies to look at capacity building projects as well.
Definitely. I think you mentioned something that is key, and is student returning to their home countries. For some programs is a requisite to do that. For others is not. So it really depends on the students on what to do after then. I can imagine I don't know if you even have individual figures about what happened with your students within your programs, which of them come back or not. That for us will be something very interesting to analyze globally and see which type of programs the students tend to stay, which ones tend to come back, and what are the differences between those programs that actually force students to come back to their home countries after that. But I'd love to hear from Hilda as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with what has been said, but at the same time, as I mentioned, Norway does no longer have a dedicated scholarship program. That doesn't mean that we don't fund scholarships, or fund mobility. We fund student and scholar mobility, but it's in an institutional context where the institution's need is in mind. So it is through capacity building projects. And so through that, we also have a sort of emphasis on quality enhancement in the higher education sector. And I would like to maybe bring one other dimension to the table, which is quite visible, at least in one of our programs, and that is that quality enhancement actually is on both sides of the table. It is for both the Global South and the Global North. And so in that program, for instance, we fund and encourage mobility that goes both ways. So not only from the Global South to the North, but the other way as well, because we think we have a lot to learn from the Global South as well. And then one other point that I would like to mention that we see now that we do not have a scholarship program is that I think in times of crises and conflict, and we're seeing more of that, it seems, these days, I think scholarship programs can have a great effect when sustaining institutional cooperation is sort of breaking down because it's not possible. So we see that then sometimes can be difficult for us to keep some of those institutional partnerships going in regions that are in conflict. But I think it's still it's a way to go, I think, to keep the institutions and their needs in mind, and to, through scholarships, then increase the capacity of the higher education staff in the Global South.
Great. I'm really loving to hear the different examples and approaches that you're taking to I guess, the same objective. We're trying to do the same and just trying in different ways, in complementary ways as well. There is something else that yes, please, of course.
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Maybe just one more perspective. It's all very well to award scholarships, and I think we all agree that's quite beneficial to do so. However, I think it's not enough, because you have to make it sustainable in the sense that you actually keep contact, that you actually stay in touch. Mm-hmm. So this is why alumni work for us is very, very important. Mm-hmm. We have around about 130, I think, alumni associations around the world. So we try to keep in touch with them. They also have little funding to have joint events and implement initiatives and so on and so forth. But it's very important to actually have these people as anchors in the country. And I could go on and on and on about anecdotes about people who actually come to Germany and finish their PhD, go back and then act as a partner in years to come in a project with their home institution in Germany, or sometimes they even go back and found universities themselves, like our colleague Ashraf Mansour, Professor Mansour, did in Cairo. So he founded a university, and I think he's got 30,000 students now. So wow. These are the things that can come from working with your alumni partners in the countries and the regions.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's also a very good point. To the rest of you, how much do you keep track with your alumni? Do you consider them strategic as well? And yep.
We have, I think what we want to continually prove, which is what you're tackling with this report, is that funding higher education makes sense, and that actually higher education needs to be funded as well as primary and secondary. And one of the best ways of proving that is, as you've said, through data. And the best data we have is actually the data we have on mobility programs, because most of us are, in fact, obliged, because it's government funding, to keep track of what happens to those alumni. So there are longitudinal studies, as well as the sort of associations and mentoring programs. There are longitudinal studies on what impact alumni have had in their host countries and in their home countries. And there's also counterfactual studies. So we've looked at the cadre of students who nearly got a scholarship but didn't, and see what they've gone on to do, to again show why scholarship funding is so important, because there are so many talented people and very small amounts of funding for it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting, Joanna. Thanks very much. With it also, one of the other topics that we've shown screen before, it was the differences, because we're talking about tertiary education, the difference between higher education and sometimes called VET or TVET. We're talking about 2-year short programs at tertiary education level. I guess our expectations were, they're probably smaller, but we were surprised ourselves about how small, considering how critical this level of education could potentially be in countries in terms of employability, in terms of lifelong learning, or even achieving the SDGs in different ways. So we had our own very long conversations with ideas, why do you think this can be? But we'd rather ask you directly, and particularly the agencies. Why do you think this small amount to TVET? It is a matter of contacts. It is a matter of priorities. It is. Nobody wants to answer it. I don't know if that makes sense from your national perspective, because again, agencies are different. Do you or yourselves differentiate between one or the other? Do they only do one?
So most of the programs that we have is for higher education. So in a way, maybe that is part of the answer. But I think, and I am not. I think maybe the TVET sector in some cases are maybe not. It's more difficult to identify maybe for us. And it's more maybe informal, and it's sort of harder to access. And I think NGOs very often play maybe a larger role in this sector. And as I already mentioned, we now, our policy is more towards partnership, like a partnership model. So for us then, the partnerships would be TVET schools and organizations in Norway that could cooperate. But the TVET sector in Norway is not very internationalized, so they don't have those contacts necessarily. So we do have some experience with NGOs, and they do a fabulous job. But I think also some of the funding is going on into more multilateral programs as well. So, yeah.
Okay, that's already is pointing out some things in that direction, giving us some light. We were also mentioning that universities are usually associated. There's usually a national university association, conference rectors, something representatives that allows you to then to get to the usually TVET doesn't have it. Could that play a role, for example?
In the UK, they do have it. There's an association of colleges and further education, and for example, the Brazilian scheme, Science Without Borders, brought, I can't remember, 100,000 students worldwide. The UK got something like 10,000 of those students, of which a percentage went to colleges and further education. And so they were represented there. I think the problem is that further education has been starved for many years, and it's been, to some extent, victim to the discussion about whether people should go to university or not. And of course, we want everybody with the ability to go to university, but there should be more options to also fund TVET. And in many countries where polytechnics became universities, those TVET opportunities got starved and squeezed out of the system, which is why you find, for example, in South Africa, many people who can't find work and actually don't find the training that they need. Or if you think about migrant populations and refugee populations, TVET is an incredibly important part. I think the whole of education system needs disrupting. We've had COVID. We need to explode the idea of a 3-year degree, and we need to have far more mobility between micro-credentials, lifelong learning, TVET opportunities, and higher education. And many universities actually have relationships with colleges. And the colleges, for example, in the northwest of England, are deprived area. Some parts of it quite deprived. There are lots of pathways between the colleges and the universities, and we would like to see far more of that seen in global financing systems as well.
Yeah, thanks.
So, again, the picture is a little different, from our national perspective, in the sense that vocational training is extremely important to the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's in their strategy, and they attach a lot of importance to it. And also, there's a century-long tradition of apprenticeships and dual education in Germany. However, this is specific to kind of a middle European context, Central European context. You have a similar system in Austria, in Switzerland. However, we find it difficult to relate to that internationally, because there's also the distinction of blue collar, white collar perspectives, and certainly from my years abroad, I know that doing blue collar work you don't do in some countries, because it's not, there's a lot of dignity and value attached to it, which I think is wrong, very much so. However, and I have to say that as a DAD, we don't have any mandate for TVET, because we're a higher education institution. However, there's also a very strong practice orientation when it comes to German curricula. We have a diverse university system. We have a sector, and not unlike the one in the Netherlands, where we have universities of applied sciences, and traditionally they work extremely close with industry, with companies, and of course, this sector is also, belongs to our membership. We support them with programs, and there we have a lot of, university and company relationship, and I think that's very important, because after all, you want to educate people in order for them to find jobs, and there needs to be relevance with regards to the degrees.
Mm-hmm. And Mark?
Yeah, so firstly, I would really support and speak to the importance of TVET as a sector for us in supporting development around the world. And I do think that it is up and coming. So if you're looking at the narratives, it's the same in the Netherlands and in Germany, that our ministry is really pushing for TVET to be important as a connection between jobs and skills, especially for the vastly increasing youth around the world. Mm-hmm. You cannot serve all of them with higher education. You probably don't want to serve all of them with higher education. So you do have to work at TVET to do to do better and to do what we need to be doing. As for NUFIC, we do work in TVET. And what we've encountered over the last years in our work is that it is quite difficult to work with TVET both in country but also from a Dutch perspective. And I really echo what Hilda said. We have quite a good TVET system, which is somewhat similar as well to the German one, where we have dual learning, where we have a close connection between education and labor market. However, it's very much focused on the Netherlands, and it's not as internationalized as the university sector is. So transferring the learnings of what we are doing in the Netherlands and supporting institutions abroad from that sector is actually very hard, because it's hard to help them over the hurdles of different languages, different contexts, different cultures. Conversely, in country, it's hard to find the right institutions. Universities, as you say, are often organized, but also have a bit of a hub function for the wider region. So an intervention towards a university has quite a big effect. For TVET colleges, this differs between the colleges, and it's very hard to figure actually out which one is the right one to intervene with. So in that combination, I think we need to lower barriers on both ends. We need to lower barriers in our own countries, so to make it easier to collaborate with TVET institutions and the other ones. And then locally, we need to figure out how to do it in the best possible way.
Thanks very much, Mark. As I am biting my tongue here to make lots of follow-up questions. It's like, yeah, but I also have questions here, and I want to open the floor to the audience. So in that respect, I guess even when I have here more questions to myself, I'll be encouraging if some of you will be taking some questions sort of at the same time. I'll ask you as well to be brief if there are some questions that you would like to ask. I also will ask you to be brief in your answers, because as I say, we have lots of things that we'd like to talk about, and we haven't just yet. We'll take one question here. We'll take one question there, and okay. Let me see hands. So, sure, you can start here.
Great. Is this working? Yes. Hi, my name is Jonathan Williams. I'm an independent consultant. I work out of Canada. I've worked on evaluations of lending programs, the World Bank African Centers of Excellence programs in 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and it was really interesting to see how supported those programs are, I think notably by DAD scholarships for students to travel within Africa to different countries. And then I have also worked on in one case I did an evaluation of a donor program, Canadian government donor program for institutional development. So it's some of the reflections on like the ability to think in the long term, for instance, on a donor program, and how suitable is that for developing a higher education institution, I think is a really, really key point. The two questions I wanted to ask were, the first one was, how much of this donor aid for scholarships is actually development aid really? If the students don't have to stay in the country, then it's support for that student, but otherwise for the society it's a bit unclear to me, and it might be an intent to build those connections, as you said, much more. So one question was just, I guess, a thought-provoking question about how much is this actually foreign aid? And then the second question was, did you do a comparison of these patterns and how they compared to lending, say multilateral lending agencies, and how they're putting money into higher education? So that'd be a really fascinating, I think, comparison of kind of the distribution that you spoke about. So those were just my two questions, which I guess were more about the presentation, although I welcome others' thoughts.
So one question is about data that I can answer super quick. We did say, let's make this simple. Of every $10 that, taking 2019 data, were from donor countries or organizations, so 8 of them were DAC countries, 1 of them was non-DAC countries, and 1 of them is multilateral. So that will give you, as I said, we have more data, we haven't brought it here. But of every $10, 8 DAC, 1 non-DAC countries, and another 1 multilateral. So that's the current division of the nation. And now the second question was more for you. I don't know which of you would like to to answer, which is about the scholarship and the returning or the possibility to not return.
I wanted to give a couple of statistics actually from the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission
Please.
programme. So 86% of all our alumni, over 56,000, I think something like that, have gone back to their countries. I'll give you one statistic here where over 617 students who'd studied for a PhD have trained over 1,350 new PhD students, 25,000 master's students, and hundreds of thousands of undergraduates. So those that go back either to a higher education institution or to government, we've got the figures on where they go back and help build capacity in those countries. So I think there is a direct correlation between spending on someone going overseas to study and coming back and then spreading their expertise. But I also would say, from the earlier point I made, that actually split-site PhDs or distance, which is some of the mechanisms we're now looking at, also help, but have the same effect.
Thank you.
Also,
Please.
yeah, so I really like your question because I think it does touch on a very important point, and what it points to is that you need to be very deliberate about how you do scholarships. As NAFIC, what we do is we work with mid-career professionals, so we don't take the people fresh out of high school or university, but rather we work with people that are already embedded within a professional environment and help and get them to the Netherlands to do a master's or a short course, and then they go back and then immediately apply their learnings into their professional environment. We have a 98.5% return rate, so virtually all of our scholarship holders do return to the country of origin. And that is what we want, because we completely agree that if you give scholarships, but instead these people stay in the Netherlands, then you're not contributing enough to what needs to be done in the countries you're trying to support. So I think you have to design it well, but then it is a true type of aid delivery.
And just a clarification question to the two of you as the statistics that you've put to the table. They didn't have to return, right?
No, they did have to return.
They did
It's
have
a
to
condition of the funding.
So in this country, it was the condition of the funding that
Yeah.
they have to return to the home country.
Exactly, and we had an agreement with the employer that the employer would pay for the position in the year or in the months that they were absent, to also make sure that we don't have spillover effects to families and so forth that perhaps are left behind but still need livelihoods.
That sounds like a clever design. Okay, good. Thanks very much. There was another question there. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for the insights. My name is Hector Ulloa. I am the president of the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund. I have a question, might be a bit abstract and up in the air, but we'll try, which relates to this thing we have seen with the data right now, because from our organization, we work in some long-term projects related to higher education, which isn't easily shown through quantitative data. For example, we have some works with indigenous organizations and indigenous higher education institutions who work a lot with the preservation of knowledge and culture and language in these areas. So this kind of work hardly fits in the terms that sometimes we use when we talk about cost efficient, that it is cost efficient, or how you can measure this kind of things, since it's more long-term societal impact. So my question was, one for the team and then the rest for the panelists. The first one is, how do we measure then these other kind of projects that are don't fit our traditional ways of measuring aid efficiency? Have you included this, or if not, do you plan to include something related to these other projects? And then to the panel will be, if this kind of works that can't be easily measured in these traditional ways, does that then cause your institutions or your organizations to shy away from this kind of projects? And if it does cause you to shy away, then do you have any idea of what do we need to change then to kind of also include these other new, more at a societal level, aid in higher education?
Okay, thanks very much. I guess you've opened a black box inside a black box. We haven't, well, we only briefly touched about impact, maybe when you were talking about people coming back and them having themselves employed and then probably employing other people, open universities. So all that is impact. We haven't touched into that. because we need to start for what we have right now, which is some data about money flows. We'd love to hear that. We also had internal conversations about how do we measure it, and I guess we reflect on that at the end of the report in the conversations when we say we need to understand the nature of tertiary education aid, and understanding the nature meaning what are we trying to get and how do we measure it, what success means, and that goes very much in hands with the indicators. So from our perspective, just very quickly saying we have not get close to impact yet, although we'd love to see that on the future. And doing that, how do you measure impact? You've already measured a few things, and is that something that you'd like to touch upon?
Well, I think that we would of course like to be very flexible, but we still work within a framework. And in our case, the framework is that we work with higher education institutions. So if this is work that goes on at other levels or between student groups or something like that, then it's sort of that doesn't. Our catchment area does not include that because in our programs it is through the higher education institutions, and the higher education institutions may not always be what they are focusing on, of course. So that I think that's maybe some part of the issue and the problem.
Mm-hmm.
We work on a theory of change model. So most of the funding that we have comes from funding agencies, and they ask for a theory of change which would require the impact on particular groups, for example. So there are projects where the impact is meant to be on the community, for example, civil society organisations, and then that will be tracked and evaluated. But also universities increasingly want to show their mission and their third mission, and therefore they, in the UK, it's part of a funding mechanism that they have to demonstrate impact in the community as much as the research impact. But in many other countries, that's also becoming increasingly important, I think, that universities show their third mission.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to get many more. We have like at least 4 more questions in the audience, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But at the same time, they've told us that we have to be very strict about finishing on time. So to get, I guess, a middle way on that, it will be, I'll ask you kindly if you can remain here. I will remain here, maybe not right here because some people have to come in, but outside. We'll be available for more questions, but at the same time, we'll also allow the conference to run in time. It's 5:30 right now. It's the time to close the panel. I'd like to ask you for some closing remarks, very brief closing remarks, maybe looking at the future. How do your agency see cooperation in the future? Just a brief closing remark, because we are already on time, and I apologize too.
Sure. So I think a main priority for us in the coming years is to go further in localization and contextualization of the work we're doing, as also to contribute to the decolonization of aid. And there was a bit in the report about the fragmentation of funding and how we could potentially tackle that. And I think a way to do that is to start at the needs and start in country and look what is it that they are reporting, what is it that they're asking for, and then join as a group around that question instead of starting in our respective capitals or respective offices and saying, how can we help? So I think that is a movement that we're very deliberately trying to make, and I think is crucially important.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Well, say the same thing. We really need to, have discussions with our partners in the Global South to update support programs, both for scholarships and for institutional cooperation. This is also something that is on our agenda. We are dealing also with, how can we become, as an organization, more climate friendly when it comes to mobility. How can we have socially and ecologically sustainable cooperation? And another thing that really is important for us in the future is to become more inclusive and further diversify the beneficiaries of our programs.
Okay, thanks very much, Joanna.
We have over 500 universities. Our universities are key to sustainable development. They do extraordinary work. Our universities in the Global South do amazing work. We just want to, so we welcome the report, we welcome this conference, we welcome the level of understanding that's growing about the importance of higher education, and we will continue to work to contribute to that evidence that allows countries to actually, in the end, put a percentage of recommended spend on tertiary as well as on the whole of the education. And that would be our aim over the next few years.
Excellent, thanks very much. And Hilda?
Yeah, I think we also will continue to put emphasis on institutional cooperation and capacity building, and we will continue to have focus on co-creation and the benefits of cooperation for both partners, both in the Global South and the Global North, and also to focus on sustainability of the cooperation, both in terms of the SDGs, as you mentioned, but also in the, when it comes to impact and longevity. And I think one of those things is to continue to encourage and facilitate more South-to-South cooperation.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much to the four of you. Apologies for all the questions that were, you people that raised their hand and we didn't get to the questions. I say we'll be happy to stay here. I guess it feels like we just opened a box of things that we didn't have before, we didn't know before. Excuse me?
¿Quién ayuda? ¿El Congo que produce el coltán o quien produce el celular? Creo que es cooperación o financiamiento a la cooperación. Disculpa, Victoria, pero no me dice la palabra.
Okay. Yeah, and I apologize. There were several hands up.
Cooperamos y las universidades cooperamos dignamente. Pero no hay ayuda, hay cooperación y hay financiamiento a la educación. No ayuda. Todos nos ayudamos.
Yes, just for those of you that didn't get it, he's talking about the why do we call it aid, we should call it cooperation, which it's something that in principle I really agree with. I do, and that's, I guess we've been talking about cooperation more in that way, and partnerships and South-South cooperation. It seems that we've started a conversation here. For those of you whose questions were not answered, I'm going to remain here. I'll ask them if they can to remain here as well. Thanks very much, everybody. And let's cooperate, let's talk.